Do you think you were a problem child, Bill?
No, not at all.
What makes you
Well,
so sure?
when I was 3, I was a pain in the neck. But then since then, I've been pretty easy, actually. I I was always an ask for permission, not for forgiveness kind of kid.
Hmm. Yes, mostly me too, I think. Um, do you remember children around you who were problem children?
Yes,
Can
they
you try
scared
and
me. I did not like them.
okay, could you try and define problem child?
This is going to sound really bad because it's not what I believe as an adult,
Hmm.
but like people who didn't listen to authority figures, who did whatever they want, who were little pains in the neck, who used to run around and yell and be loud and try to get away with stuff. And, you know,
Hmm.
it's, yeah, I didn't like those kids
Why not?
because they make it harder for everyone. They feel selfish somehow.
There's a an interesting line, isn't there, between somebody being selfish and somebody being brilliant.
Sure.
I mean, I know you've kind of qualified it before you said it, but everything you've just described
Yeah.
sounds to me like, that kid's got his life on the right track. Somebody
Right.
who's
So you,
self-assured, somebody who doesn't just take the word of authority,
sure.
somebody who has the creativity and capacity to buck the status quo or to move out
Sure.
of the, prescribed norms or
Sure. But that's, I mean, but that is, you were also describing revolutionaries on both end of the spectrum, you know. Hitler and Lenin were also trying to like break out of the norms, you know. So it's like one man's terrorist, another person's freedom fighter, you know, all that nonsense.
yeah. I suppose the reason why I've thought of this for this week is that in the UK, there's been a huge commotion caused by a four-part series on Netflix called Adolescence.
Yeah, I've seen of it and heard some of it, but I haven't watched it.
And I mean, I would recommend watching it. There's lots of discussion in the UK press about whether it should be shown in schools as a compulsory viewing. Lots of parents trying to work out if they should watch it or should watch it with their children, for example.
Hmm.
And that particular series centers on the fallout, the aftermath of a murder of a teenage girl by one of her classmates, somebody she knows from school, an otherwise ordinary seeming boy who stabs her to death. It's sort of startling, I think, for a lot of parents who believe that their children are good people
Hmm.
and that we seem to have this strange self-righteousness about being good people and therefore we must only have good children. Um,
What is good in those in this scenario?
well, what is good? And that's why I was asking you to try and go into what problem child actually is.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a lot of it has to do with thinking that your needs matter more than other people's,
Mm.
or your desires matter more than other people's.
So that makes you a problem.
Well, if in the end it ends up sort of taking away from everybody else, yeah,
Mm.
you know,
I mean, is there a sense at all in you that problem children are highly creative?
not necessarily. I think that can be true.
Mm. I was thinking over how many artists had, maybe if not being problem children, certainly had problem childhoods.
Sure. But, you know, there's lots of people who have problem childhoods who don't end up being genius artists.
No, but I do wonder about the relationship between having something in childhood that is traumatizing or at the very least challenging,
Sure.
and that
I mean,
creates and being in itself something creative, that it generates a sense of otherness, even that then gives the right kind of platform or worldview, someone who can go beyond kind of, I guess, expectations.
yeah, I mean, I think that it's possible. I just don't think that it's, instantiate, like of one to the other,
Mm.
Uh, I mean, I think that there were elements of difficult childhood on my own, but I did not, here's another term for you, act out in a way, uh, towards the people in my family. I mean, the worst thing I did was I just didn't do my homework ever. So I got, even though
Gosh, you rogue.
I was in like advanced, I would get C's in advanced classes, that kind of thing. That's like the worst thing I ever did. Um, but yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I was thinking about who's responsible for our children.
For making them the way they are, or responsible for them once they exist.
Well, take the question whatever way you want to.
Okay.
Who's responsible for our children?
Probably the answers that I would want to say is, we you are responsible for your child, but ultimately I think we as society are responsible for the children. These are all reasons why I do not have children. Both
But
of
none,
those answers are the reasons why I don't have children.
right, I know, but as part of a wider society,
Yep.
do you feel any pressure? As someone who doesn't have a child, do you
Yep.
feel a responsibility to children?
Yes.
Hmm.
Yep.
What does that look like? How does that manifest, Bill?
I think that it manifests as, uh, uh, being a good role model to some extent, being kind to other people, all that kind of stuff. Um, I think once they're old enough, actually talking to them about stuff and not treating them like an equal who's trying to figure things out rather than as a subordinate. Um, I think passing along the things that you've learned to younger people is part of your job of being on Earth.
Hmm. But
Um,
how do we know, much as we might not be able to define as you did, what a problem child actually is? Many of us can't actually define what it means to be good,
sure.
can
Yeah.
we? I mean, I've put the bad girl, not the good girl, the bad girl, Louise Bourgeois.
Can we? Is it easier to define what is bad than what is good? Is what is good the absence of what is bad?
Mm. I think we're talking about this in a very careful way, actually. Surprises me. We don't need to defang this. We can speak our minds. People know it's just you and I having a conversation between friends.
Yeah.
You know, does being good mean being a disciplinarian?
Not necessarily.
Does being bad mean that, you don't give your child their own way? In a wider societal sense, do we give children a sense of power and authority, and then are
Well,
we creating monsters? Let's think about that.
sure. I mean, isn't it interesting though that there are people who would say that punishing your children is bad, and then there's other people who would say that not punishing your children is bad.
Well,
You know?
that's why I don't really want us to
Yeah.
sit on the fence about this, because we
Yeah.
bring such specific.
I think the problem is that all of these things are ultimately double-edged swords, and everything we do to a child and everything about the way a child acts can be multiple things at once,
Hmm.
which is what makes it so hard. If there was a right answer, I mean, how many did you read a bunch of books about how to raise a child when you had a younger kid? There's a
No,
million
I
self-help books out there about how to, psychologically raise them when they're toddlers and all that nonsense.
no, I mean, a lot of people try to push those sorts of books on me, and I resisted them, and it wasn't because I was lazy. But I felt from my own point of view that I should experience the thing that I had not experienced before I could make any decision about what to do.
Yeah.
Um, I've been very interested in how trolled mothers are online. You
Okay.
know, a
By whom?
mother, any
Mostly
mother
by
could
other mothers, by the way, I think. Out of instances.
fine, and this is called problem child, not problem parent, by the way, but there is
Yeah.
obviously a direct link. I find
Yeah.
it fascinating that we sit in such judgment of each other's parenting.
Sure.
And I also find it kind of insane that a lot of people are talking about problem children when they don't seem to have any kind of connection to children whatsoever. In fact, some people, the only connection they have to children is that they once were a child themselves,
Sure.
possibly quite a long time ago. I am,
Well,
I,
you see children all the time. I mean, can you tell some of them? Would you ever imagine in your head that that person over there is a problem child?
well, this is where I come a bit undone, Bill, because it would be very inappropriate actually for me. If anyone ever watched this, let's say a parent of a child I teach watched one of our discussions
Sure.
ever in a million years
Yeah.
that happened, and they listened to some of my views on young people, which
Sure.
by the way are extremely tame, and I would say for the most part in my own version, I would say I'm a good person, I'm a good teacher, and most of the children I teach are delightful.
Sure.
Um, but I could speak, obviously, without being specific to a child, to children I have encountered throughout my now 25-year span of teaching, where I felt unsafe
Yep.
to be around a child. Now that's a problem child. But that the way that that can come about might not just be because a child throws a chair across a room, might
Yep.
not just be because a child has some kind of violent streak or tendency. It might be something else. And
Says
this,
something inappropriate or whatever else. Yeah.
it could be that, we have these extraordinary, we feel very entitled, I think, to speak as if we're psychologists half the time now.
Sure.
TikTok and Instagram have given rise to words like sociopath, narcissist,
Sure.
so on and so on. And we're using these words willy-nilly as if we really know what they mean. Most of us, of course, know what they mean, but are we applying them in the right way? But I would say that I could point out several sociopaths in any group of 1,000 people. And if you're in a school where there's 1,300 of us, of course there are going to be some children who are problem children, if that's how
Sure.
that kind of behavior is labeled. I put Louise Bourgeois here just because I think her childhood is interesting in retrospect. The first half of her career, she wasn't particularly widely known. I think it was 1982 or 1984 before she had a retrospective of her work when she was already in her middle age. And it came out simultaneously in Art Forum, I think. An article was written about her in which she revealed that, pretty much her childhood had informed everything that she had done. Her father had had a long-standing 10-year affair, live-in mistress, who was the child's teenage governess. Louise Bourgeois was the middle child, the favoured child. This is all easily accessed information now.
Sure.
But, that sense of shame and of um, duality, I guess, is another pop psychology word, was is rife in her work. And when I saw this series, The Bad Girl, obviously much, much later in her lifespan, it struck me that, the good girls at school were sometimes the worst people. You
Yeah.
know, sometimes the good girls at school were problem children. And sometimes those children who were labeled as bad or naughty were the best people. They had the most to them. They had the most meat on their kind of emotional or psychological bones.
Well, I mean, even the first group of people you're talking about, the good girls or whatever, the good kids,
Mm.
like What made them good? The fact that they listened to you and got good grades?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we do conflate this notion of goodness with being biddable, don't we? And also
Sure,
playing the game, knowing how to play the game
sure,
equates to being a good child. Being a problem child are many problem children who are just extraordinary creatures, wonderful humans, but they either don't, can't, or won't play the game.
right, yeah. Is that
And
is But it's interesting because like there's the good way to play the game, which is, do what people ask you and then they'll leave you alone or whatever it is, or you'll get ahead in
mm,
society if you just follow the rules, right? Like that's sort of the implication. But then there's the bad way, which is I'm going to manipulate the rules to my favor, which is a whole other similar thing. You're both playing by the rules, as it were.
mm,
You know, your intentions have some element of this, don't they?
yes, and I'm sure that most of us have encountered people, maybe in our own childhoods, certainly in adulthood, where we can see that there is fundamentally a problem with the person, such that
Yeah,
they have a kind of badness about them.
yeah,
Now, that's how I see problem child. But when I hear the term problem child, I think often it's used to simply describe somebody who doesn't fit the kind of
oh, I
cookie
see.
cutter
Sure. See,
ideas.
I don't think somebody being different or quirky or whatever. I understand that there are people who would call those people problem child. That would not be the definition I would use. I have no problem with somebody being different. I have a problem with someone disrupting everything for their own gain,
But what about those children who disrupt?
for good reason.
No, those children who disrupt the conventions or norms set by those others who don't
Sure,
understand what it's like to be that child.
sure.
I mean, we
I
see
mean,
this all the time. We see institutions, rules, and
sure.
kind of ideologies that spring up around what it means. Again, this notion of like goodness, let's just use it as the
Yeah,
broad term. And sometimes the people that put those systems and ideas in place have no real compassion,
yeah. Well,
no
it's
empathy.
like you're talking about, Bob Dylan playing rock and roll at a folk festival. You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like somebody, a lot of people say, well, you're breaking the rules. This is a folk festival. And somebody else would say, yeah, but this is where music's going. You need to follow because this guy knows something you don't know.
mm.
You know,
But I
like it's,
think about
it's
all those young people who, for many years, were kept out of mainstream public school, for example. They were sent to specialist schools because they
sure,
had behavior problems. And
which we now see as autism or dyslexia or whatever.
yes, exactly. And, when we think about Van Gogh and how he was, slung out into the, slurry of a world that thought he was a smelly, cantankerous, difficult hellman,
Sure,
how he was perhaps just misunderstood. It doesn't mean he wasn't actually all those things,
sure,
but we've been so quick to judge problem children, to give these young people labels. And
sure,
childhood is a time, as I think most reasonable people could say, should be a protected time in
sure.
which the developing person is given enough space to, to discover, to find out for themselves certain things without fear
Go
that
ahead.
they're going to be torn down.
But do you think that part of it is just a lack of time? We can't spend 10 years analyzing each person so that we get every single one of those decisions right. Society has to make filters to put people places in order to function.
Yes, but I think much as we don't have time, we do have time. We should make time. These are the important things.
Well,
Children,
to you, yeah,
children have got a right to be a problem. kind of, they need, as I said, the space to be a problem if that's how they are. I mean, I'm looking at a picture of Charlotte Salomon,
I was gonna say, who is this? Okay.
and I mean, we've spoken about her before. You might remember that Life for Theatre
Hmm.
is her major work. Um, Leben oder Theater, ein Singspiel. She is often cited as a kind of Holocaust artist. That's how she's described. She was gassed in Auschwitz in 1943. She was born in 1917. She grew up in a very intelligent family. Her dad was a doctor who was responsible for the pioneering mammography that now helps to detect breast cancers in millions of women. Very important person, stripped, of course, of his job. However, the young Charlotte, blighted in her family, her entire family, mother's side of the family at least, blighted by mental health issues. Lots of suicide. Her own mother, in fact. Um, the reason why she's here, I suppose, is because when we look at the work she made in her body of, life or theatre, we see in the kind of prelude section lots of references to the events of childhood, the things that were truly formative, the things that she clung on to in her mind. And one of the things that always stood out to me about it is this particular piece where, having taken her own life, um, Charlotte expected her mother to return. Her mother had promised that she would return 10 times a night to tell her of what was happening in the celestial spheres. And so the young Charlotte would go to the window through the night to see if her mother would communicate with her. In Life of Theatre, it just says she was disappointed. All this time, this
Aren't we
child.
all?
But it really struck a chord, not because the circumstances are the same for me or my life, but just that sense that, things that we might be promised in childhood that might then mean that we seem like we're problems because we have an expectation that something's going to happen, or that,
Right.
I think adults we're crazy. We forget, we forget our own child mind.
Yeah.
And we're so unforgiving with it. And myself included in my parenting, I know that at times I've been really ruthless with my child. I've forgotten what it's like to be a child.
But isn't that just the way of things? You've gotten older. You're not a child anymore. Your child is a child. Someday your child won't be a child and they'll treat their child that way. Like that's just part of growing up, growing old, experience. Do you think I mean there's the constant conversation about like losing your inner child and all that kind of stuff, right? Finding your inner child again.
Hmm.
Beginner's mind and all of this kind of thing. Do you think that that's real, or is that just nostalgia for something that existed before?
I don't think there's anything nostalgic about acknowledging that my child lives within me. The child I am is not just the child I was, because I am that. I'm not
Sure.
separate to it. It's not some distinct thing that's over
Right. So
there.
so 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 in this situation, then why do you think you forgot and treated your child's why would you crush your child's, you know what I mean? Like if you actually have that inside of you.
Well, I mean, I could give you the the reason that a lot of people might bandy about, which is that, in the moment my child was communicating in a different channel, or that, that it triggered something, a trauma. My actual child that I have given birth to
Yeah.
behaved in a way that so reminded me of something that it almost was kind of beyond conscious, my
Yeah,
conscious ken. Uh, we're always acting out as adults because of our child, the child within us.
sure,
You know, I see you do it every week.
sure.
I see your child.
Yeah.
I mean,
My
before,
child, see, I think actually that I live as an adult much more in my, I think my inner child is much more at the surface than a lot of other people I know, to my detriment sometimes.
hmm, I don't know if you can say that it's more at the surface
Okay.
than others.
I think it's, I am conscious of it more than seemingly other people are, considering the way they talk about it. You know, I'm constantly thinking about how I felt when I was younger and how I saw the world, much like the Roman Empire. There's the running joke about men knowing, thinking about the running empire, Roman Empire a lot.
I
Raining
just wonder
cats.
that as an artist, Bill, you know, when you're making work, when you're making your movie, when you're taking photographs,
Sure.
is your child sitting on your shoulder? Is your child speaking through you? Is your
My
child
child
there?
is judging me.
Yeah, what's going on there?
It wants me to live up to the expectations it has for me.
Mm. Is that a dangerous game?
Maybe, or maybe it's more of what a lot of people need to do.
Mm. I mean, there's a lot of things in therapy where,
What
you
else
know,
should be the standard if not that?
mm, we're encouraged though, aren't we, to meet our child,
Sure.
you know, to soothe them, to reassure them, to
Mhm.
is that quite a sort of useful thing, a kind of futurism, I guess, of psychology, where actually you can do it the other way as well. You can imagine that you're an older version of yourself returning to speak to you now, or you can imagine that you are the child again speaking from the position you occupy in
Sure.
this
Yeah.
space and
10
time.
years from now, you will give everything and everything to be where you are now, the age you are now, with what you have now, you know.
Mm. I just put this in as the last slide because and the reason I've put after 2009 is I actually don't know what year Iris Grace painted this, but she was born in 2009. Um,
Baby.
well, one of the many children that could be classed as a kind of prodigy. But she came to painting at sort of 2 or 3 years old, I think. There's a lot online about her. Very, very good, extensive website about her. Her mother's
Good
very proactive.
extensive PR campaign by her parents.
Hang on a minute.
Go
Hang
ahead.
on. This is a young person with autism, and she
Yeah,
came to painting as part of an autism therapy. Now, I don't want to speak to it more than that because my knowledge of it is very limited. But from what I could tell, and when I looked at this, apart from anything, when I looked at this painting, I think it's, you know, it's very beautiful. It's very soothing. It reminds me of
it
the
is.
shore near to where I live here. There's all sorts of reasons why I like looking at this. But when I then clicked onto the website and had a look and saw, you know, the mum has written a book about Iris Grace, the relationship with animals, particularly. But painting is this kind of byproduct of being this child. And again, I just want to say that a lot of young people who are young people with autism, for example, are classed as problem children.
Sure.
And we seem to have more children than ever before with autism. And so
Right.
we're raising a society that is going to be full of neurodivergent individuals. We already
Well,
have a society
I was
that's
going to say we already have a society that's full of neurodivergent
fine,
individuals, just so we
but
don't label them that. Yeah.
now they have the labels. And I'm wondering about what that means for us if problem children, this a terrible, terrible phrase actually, problem child.
Sure.
You know, do we label people problem adults?
Yeah, we do.
Well, not in quite the same scathing way, I think.
Sure. But at the
problem
same
child.
time, you when I made the PR joke, you jumped on me. But like, should we judge this differently because this young girl has autism, is autistic? To a large extent, that should be irrelevant to the work that this person makes. That's actually respecting her autism as not a disability, just the way she is, right?
Sure, but that's also not the point of showing the painting. The
Okay,
painting in
yeah,
itself, as I said, is something that just struck me as a beautiful image. It was something that I like to look at,
it is. Yes,
right? But then finding out that this painting was created in conditions such as an autism therapy was interesting in context of problem child, because
sure.
how many young people do we know have never had the benefit of being, I guess, therapized? There's
Yeah,
lots of young people out there that, you know, this young girl's mother, I don't know, perhaps father as well, but certainly mother, has done everything, it seems, to make sure that her child has been celebrated, is celebrated. And wouldn't it be wonderful if all so-called problem children could have a champion, and that's really our responsibility as adults, as a collective in society, not just as parents, not just as educators, but just simply as people, that we acknowledge that we bring forward our young, and rather than telling the world that they are problem children, why are we not raising them up, not just raising them?
sure. But what makes any of these people, is there raising them up above other people or raising them up to the level of everyone else? Like
Oh, Bill,
what is the
why
standard
did
of
you have to
raising?
put it into some kind of strange comparative?
Well, because like raising them up, like what does that mean? Why does Iris Grace
I
deserve more
use the word
attention than the next
celebration.
person?
I use the word celebratory, right?
Okay.
To celebrate
Okay.
the
Well, then we
many.
should celebrate all of us, right?
Yes, indeed. But if
Yeah.
we can't do it with our children, we're not going
Yeah.
to do it with anyone, are we?
True. It's true.
Imagine a culture in which the young are celebrated. Now, the irony is actually that we covet youth, don't we?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, youth is the greatest thing that you can have in our society.
But there's something so odd and disturbing about that. We covet youth. It's the thing we crave,
Yeah. And yet we judge people for being young.
but we're so mean to our
Right.
young.
We want the things that come with youth. We want the promise. We want the health. We want the vigor. We want the sexuality. We want all of those things, right? But we want it with the wisdom that comes with having lived. It's the great irony of life, right?
And if we're so bloody wise, why are we not doing more to protect our young people?
Protect them from whom? Protect them from what?
Well, that goes into the big soup of what is bad.
Yeah. And when do they stop being young people and when should we stop protecting them?
Hmm.
And what if protecting them means that somebody else loses their freedom to do what they want to do with their lives? I mean, I think this is all the big questions of society.
It is, and I think, we have been very tame actually with this, but we could really spend a long time talking about problem child, because problem child, in the discussion, the dialogue around problem child, we inevitably are discussing, as you say, wider societal or social issues.
Well, we didn't ask the question that you asked me at the beginning. Do you think you were a problem child?
No, like you, I was constantly asking permission. And on the other hand, I know that I would be classed as a problem child. I mean, in the survival of the fittest, I would not have survived through my
Sure.
childhood
If
had
I
it not.
called your mother right now, would she say you were a problem child, do you think, or not?
No, no, I think she would say I was very well behaved.
Yeah,
Very well behaved, very polite.
yeah,
Um, but I just want to make a point about it because I think it's relevant. You know, I was extremely ill as a child. I spent a lot of time in hospital. Mm, and I think for a lot of people, they would have considered that to make me a problem child because I was causing problems. It wasn't my fault,
sure,
but I caused problems.
sure,
And the reason why I think about it and feel it so keenly is not actually from my own story, but it's because I remember being in a private room at York Hill Children's Hospital, and my mum stayed with me every single night in a cot at the bottom of my bed. In my adulthood now, I can see how unbelievably courageous she was. But I remember in the adjoining room, through the glass at my hospital bedhead, there was a cot with a baby or a very young child called Thomas. And I mean, I had my grandmother, my mum's mum was with me every day, all through the day. And my mum stayed with me, as I said, every night. And this young child, who was probably 2 or 3 years old, had no visitors. And
yeah,
my mum would go and sit with him. And he was a problem too much for someone,
sure,
was my sense of it as a child myself. And
yeah,
I've often thought about that. I've thought about how, even in my childhood, I was horribly judgmental of
sure.
this boy's parents.
But it could have been that the father was dead and the mother was a drug addict, or you know what I mean? Who knows, right? Like,
Exactly. But what I know is that, I mean, I would doubt very much that that child lived into adolescence.
yeah,
But it it's always just swirled around in my mind a bit about it.
you
You
have
know,
a negative fantasy about Thomas.
just the problem child.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm. Anyway, from one problem child to another. I'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon.